In a kingdom that fears demons, one knight abandoned everything to protect the girl the kingdom wanted dead. But some secrets were never meant to awaken.
Ryu's hand rested on his sword. "You're being paid to kill us?" Kale shrugged. Technically. The order offered an absurd amount of money. Yori's expression darkened. Great. Another psychopath. Kyle blinked once. "You vaporized a mountain 3 days ago." That was different. How? I was emotional. Kyle stared at her silently, then slowly looked toward Ryu. "Is she always like this?" "Yes." "Why are you answering so fast?" And despite the tension, Kale nearly smiled. Because this did not look like a monster and her captor. It looked like two exhausted idiots trying desperately to survive. That realization planted doubt inside him. The kingdom's story suddenly felt less certain. Kale Draven had spent most of his life hunting dangerous things. Corrupted beasts. Things the Order preferred pretending did not exist. He knew what monsters looked like, and the two people standing in front of him did not look like monsters. They looked exhausted. That was the first thing Kale noticed after the tension of the confrontation finally faded. Not dangerous, not manipulative, just tired. The snowstorm surrounding the ruined watchtower had only grown worse as night approached, and even Kale knew traveling through the mountain pass after dark would have been suicidal. So reluctantly, the three of them ended up sharing the same shelter, though sharing was perhaps too generous a word. Ryu never fully lowered his guard, not once. Even while helping gather firewood from the collapsed ruins nearby, one hand always remained close to the sword at his waist whenever Kyle moved too close to Hyori. Kale noticed immediately, and strangely, he respected it. Because the moment he looked at Hyori, he felt something deeply unsettling beneath her mana. Not hatred, not fear, certainly not pity. Something else, something ancient. Like staring at a locked door while hearing something breathing quietly behind it, and for reasons Kyle himself did not fully understand. He suddenly wanted to know who she really was. That curiosity alone was enough to keep him from leaving or fighting. So instead, he helped Ryu set up camp beneath the ruined tower while the snowstorm howled through the mountains outside. The entire time, Hyori watched him suspiciously from beside the fire. "You are not allowed to sleep anywhere near us." Kale glanced sideways at her while placing another log into the flames. "That sounds difficult considering there's only one room. You can sleep outside." "In the blizzard?" "Yes." Ryu sighed quietly. "Hyori." "What?" "He threatened to kill us." "Technically," Kyle corrected calmly, "I threatened to capture you." "That is somehow not better." Purple sparks flickered faintly around her horns before disappearing again beneath her illusion magic. Kale quietly observed the reaction. Interesting. Even her magic behaved emotionally. Eventually, the fire grew stronger, casting warm orange light across the ruined stone walls. Yori sat wrapped tightly in blankets near the flames, muttering angrily while trying to dry her hair after nearly falling into a frozen river earlier that afternoon, while Ryu and Kale prepared the campsite. It was one step. "You walked directly onto thin ice," Ryu replied calmly while adjusting the cooking pot over the fire. "It looked stable." "It was transparent." "That sounds judgmental." Kale leaned slightly against the ruined wall nearby. "You screamed before you even fell." Hyori immediately pointed at him. "I was surprised." You were standing in 2 inches of water. It was very cold. Ryu quietly covered his mouth, unsuccessfully hiding a laugh. Hyori looked betrayed. Not you too. For the first time since meeting them, Kale nearly smiled, because this still did not feel like traveling beside a monster and her captor. It felt like watching 2 exhausted idiots trying desperately to survive the world together. And somehow, that unsettled him more than any bounty ever had. You walked directly onto thin ice, Ryu replied calmly. It looked stable. It was transparent. That sounds judgmental. Ryu quietly returned to sharpening his sword. Kyle watched the interaction silently from across the fire, then eventually exhaled through his nose. You two are exhausting. Hyori immediately pointed at him. You don't get to judge us. Actually, Kale replied, I think I do. You literally threatened to kill us. Kale shrugged slightly. Technically, there's that word again. Ryu finally looked toward him. You were never planning to fight us, were you? The fire crackled softly between them. Kale considered the question honestly. The moment I saw you protecting her instead of controlling her. His silver eyes reflected softly in the flames. The bounty stopped making sense. Hyori's expression shifted slightly. Kyle leaned back against the ruined stone wall behind him. I've hunted real monsters before, he continued quietly. They don't argue about blankets and campfire food. You are still not allowed to have any of our food, Hyori muttered. I wasn't asking. And you are never allowed to walk next to me. That feels oddly specific. You make me nervous. That sounds like a personal problem. Purple sparks flickered around her horns again. Kale stared for several seconds. Then, unexpectedly, you really are terrible at pretending to be dangerous. Hyori looked deeply offended. I vaporized a mountain. Yes, Kyle replied calmly, but emotionally. Ryu immediately turned away to hide his laughter. Stop encouraging him. And despite herself, Hyori realized the journey already felt slightly less lonely, more dangerous, definitely more annoying, but less lonely. That night, the 3 sheltered inside the ruins of an abandoned watchtower overlooking the frozen valley. Snow battered the broken stone walls while firelight flickered softly against the darkness. Kyle remained near the entrance, still awake, still watching outside. Ryu noticed immediately. You ever sleep? Occasionally. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. For several moments, only the sound of snowfall filled the silence. Then Kale finally spoke again. You really left the guild for her? Ryu's hand paused briefly against his sword. She hadn't hurt anyone, he answered quietly. The mayor wanted her executed anyway. Hyori lowered her gaze silently beneath the blanket. The order didn't care what actually happened, Ryu continued. They only saw what she was. The wind outside howled softly through the mountains. Kale studied him carefully. And that was enough for you to abandon everything? Ryu remained silent for several seconds, then calmly answered, If your job demands you murder someone helpless. His voice stayed quiet. Then maybe it isn't worth keeping. For the first time since meeting him. Kale did not immediately respond, because Ryu did not sound emotional, or manipulated, or naive. He sounded certain, and that unsettled Kyle more than anger would have. So why are you really following us? Hyori asked suspiciously. Kale looked towards the storm outside. Curiosity. That's a terrible answer. And boredom. That somehow made it worse. A faint smirk appeared briefly on Kyle's face, then slowly faded. But mostly because the Order is afraid of something. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Kale's silver eyes moved toward Hyori. When I felt your mana, he frowned slightly. It didn't feel corrupted. Hyori's fingers tightened around the blanket. It felt... Kyle hesitated. Old. Silence followed. Even Ryu's expression darkened slightly. Kyle noticed instantly. There it is again. Ryu's eyes narrowed. What? That look? Kyle almost smiled. You're already deciding whether to kill me if I say the wrong thing. Hyori slowly looked between both men. Should I be concerned? Yes, both answered immediately. Fantastic. Kyle sighed softly. I don't think you're evil, he admitted quietly. But I do think something dangerous is connected to you. Hyori looked away, and Ryu immediately noticed the fear in her expression. Without saying anything, he shifted slightly closer beside her. A small movement, barely noticeable. But Hyori noticed, and once again, that strange warmth tightened painfully inside her chest. Eventually, Kyle stood from the campfire and adjusted the anti-magic weapons at his side. So, where exactly are you two heading? Ryu hesitated briefly. Hyori answered first. North. That narrows it down considerably. We're looking for answers, Ryu said quietly. Kyle's expression slowly changed. What kind of answers? There are rumors, Ryu continued, about ancient ruins buried beyond the frontier, forgotten laboratories, lost cities. For the first time, Kyle looked genuinely serious. You're talking about the buried city. Ryu immediately noticed the shift in his tone. You know it. Kyle stared silently into the fire. I know people disappear there. That answer settled heavily across the room. Then, slowly, Kyle picked up his coat. Well, he said calmly, I'm coming with you. Hyori immediately pointed at him. No. Yes. No. You can try stopping me. Ryu's hand moved subtly toward his sword. Kale noticed immediately and smiled faintly. Relax, he said. If I wanted to fight you seriously, his silver eyes briefly met Ryu's, we wouldn't still be talking. That statement was deeply unhelpful, not even slightly reassuring. But the worst part was, Ryu believed him. And that made Hyori even more nervous. Still, neither of them could risk a fight out there, not before reaching the city. So reluctantly, Kale Draven became part of their journey, though Hyori made her conditions extremely clear. You walk behind us, bossy. You do not touch our food. I still wasn't planning to. And if you try anything suspicious, Kale looked amused, you'll vaporize me emotionally? Ryu immediately covered his mouth to hide another laugh. RYU? What? You're supposed to be on my side. I am. You're smiling. I'm not. You absolutely are. And for the first time in a very long while, Hyori laughed, softly, genuinely. Even Kale looked slightly surprised by the sound. Then several days later, they finally saw the lost city. And suddenly, nobody felt like joking anymore.